Hello, everyone. I'm JVL here with my Bulwark colleague, Will Saletan, breaking down Kamala Harris's appearance on the Howard Stern Show, which she just wrapped up. Will, this is part of the Harris barnstorming tour. We had the Who's Your Daddy? Call Me, whatever, the Daddy Show yesterday. We had 60 Minutes. We had The View. And now this. I don't know about you. I'm very excited about this because I feel like we have needed her to be out there making news and winning news cycles, and she's doing it now. I guess let's just dive in on the top line first. How'd you think she did with Stern?
Well, I think she did great, but I think it was a setup. I mean, this was to say this is a softball is such an understatement. This was like so I didn't know what Who's Your Daddy was, but this was definitely Who's Your Boyfriend, because Howard Stern gave her pretty much a platform, and any talking point she didn't offer up, he did for her. He just set her up to hit all her favorite points.
Yeah, I mean, well, this is the difference between media interviews and, you know, these sort of alternative podcast or whatever interviews. And honestly, I don't know that Harris, I mean, I'm all for her doing all of the things. But this, I think, is very helpful because it wasn't an interview, really. It was just a conversation. And it showcased a side of her that I think is tremendously attractive to voters. Tell me if I'm wrong. I don't know what your takeaways were. You could see the moments when she would segue going from, like, human being Kamala to presidential candidate Kamala. And she made those shifts pretty gracefully, but you could tell, and most of the interview was human being Kamala, which I think turns out to be a very attractive commodity to offer to voters. Right. For instance, they opened, you know, Stern is very good at this stuff, and the guy's been interviewing people for 40 years. He opened by playing Bat Dance on the background. And so his bumper music was Bat Dance, which, if you were a child of the 80s, is mostly Prince's most maligned album, because he did the soundtrack to the 1989 Tim Burton Batman. But there are some people, me among them, who really enjoyed Bat Dance, and that's how Stern opened. He said, I know you're a Prince fan, but I think this is his most underrated work, and just started her off by talking about Prince. And I don't know about you, I was so taken by the way she was like, oh yeah, I remember where Doug and I were the night that we heard the news that Prince had passed. It's like, who remembers that? And it's fantastic. And then we learned that Doug is a Depeche Mode guy, and I was like, oh, we're finally gonna get a Gen X president. How great is that? And so much of the interview was in that mode, and that is not a thing that people have gotten much of from her. And I feel like at this stage of the campaign, that's more valuable than a 60 minutes, what is your plan for bringing about peace in the Middle East? No, am I wrong? Will, talk to me.
Yeah, I thoroughly agree with this. It reminds me very much of Tim Walz, where, people, nerds like me, we watched the vice presidential debate. We were like, well, it looked to me like Vance won it on points. And it turns out, though, in the post-debate reactions from ordinary people, they're just like, I like that guy, Walz. He seems like a real person. So I think this was definitely Kamala as a real person. A couple of things. One, this is such a short campaign. We haven't gotten too much of her. In fact, we haven't really got enough of her. She's like, we did not enough of a sense of her. And for all of us who've thought she should do more interviews, I mean, these are the kind of interviews that are very good for just, who the heck is she? There's a lot of people out there who, they don't really like Donald Trump. They're not sure about this election, but they don't really have a good sense of her. And they're not going to say in a poll yet that they're going to vote for her till they get a feel for her. So that's what these venues like doing the Stern Show do. And I thoroughly agree. He got her into talking about that. And it is particularly unusual this year. In any election where Donald Trump, we're in the third Trump campaign at this point.
Yeah.
This is not just any old politician trying to humanize herself to the public. This is the only human being in the race. I mean, it's kind of a low bar. She's just got to convey to people, I'm a normal person. I'm not a sociopath like the other guy. I'm not always talking about myself. I'm interested in other people. There are people in my life who I actually love, like just for their own sake, not for my benefit. And the music, food, all of that stuff. She talked about JVL. If you get really important, it sounds like they bring the elliptical to your hotel room. That was something I learned in this interview I'd never heard before.
Yeah, it's kind of nice, right?
That's kind of sweet. I mean, I don't really want to run for president, but that's kind of a nice perk.
Yeah, she. I mean, there was what she did throughout this interview was if she had a theme that she returned to, it was about her choosing service and Trump being selfish. And I don't think she overdid it. I think she titrated it precisely right, actually. But this is what she kept weaving it in, talking about strength versus weakness. And she would say, over and over, what is weakness? Weakness is only worrying about yourself. And I thought that, again, it's a good frame. It uses jiu-jitsu on the Trump strongman stuff. It takes the idea of strength and sort of owns it, and then says, and what this guy's doing, that isn't strength, that's weakness. She harped a lot. We had news break today from Bob Woodward. He had a get that Donald Trump secretly sent COVID tests to Vladimir Putin during the pandemic. And she really just seemed genuinely outraged by it. It was one of these moments where it was nice because the news was only like 2 hours old. And so what she was saying didn't sound like the office had sat together and put out the talk. Well, here are the 3 things you should hit on this. She reacted to it the way a normal human being would. It was just like, holy shit, Americans are dying, and he's secretly sending our COVID tests over to one of America's enemies because their tests suck. And like, what is that? And right. That is, again, it was just very genuine. I had a list of things that, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I want to pull on that thread for a minute because it gets to this larger theme that I saw in this interview. And I am not a regular Howard Stern viewer, listener, any of that. So I don't know sort of where his politics exactly lie. This interview really hit. I mean, this week we had Liz Cheney endorsing Kamala, doing an appearance with her. And you can sort of think to yourself, well, Liz Cheney got pushed out of the Republican Party. She's firmly anti-Trump. She's for the Constitution. So she's going to endorse whatever candidate supports the Constitution, no matter how much he disagrees with them on the issues. But JVL, we look at the issues covered in this interview. I mean, I just wrote down from the top of it, NATO. Kamala is the person who's going to defend NATO. The other candidate isn't. The border bill. She's the person who wanted to, would sign this bill to secure the border. The other candidate tanked a bill to secure the border. Prosecution, she's the candidate of law. I mean, Howard Stern said, you're the candidate of law and order. And she talked about, we have to impose consequences on these criminals. I'm a prosecutor because I stand with the victims. I prosecute transnational gangs. I mean, I look at this lineup. This is a Republican lineup of issues. This is a thing that conservatives should be happy about. So I don't know if Stern's audience is the right audience for this, but I love this message. This is the kind of message that can actually move votes. She's got liberals. I mean, she's going to have some problems on her wing, but we saw in the polling today, she's starting to poll up to 9% of Republicans. More of this kind of talk where she's occupying that space in the political center and even the center right that Trump has abandoned. I think this does her a world of good.
Yeah, I think in a sane world, this should do her a lot of good. So I couldn't tell you what Stern's audience is anymore, right? He's got about 10 million viewers, Sirius estimates. He used to be sort of a cross between like Don Imus and early Joe Rogan. I mean, he was the prototype of all these things. Stern was very early on that. He was transgressive, and he always sort of danced around the outside of politics. He liked being censored by the blue noses, but that put him on the outs with like the Al Gores of the world, and he danced a little bit with Christine Todd Whitman in Jersey. And now he just sounds like, an aging boomer who realizes that the whole world has gone crazy, which is funny in its own way. But, so one of the things he said to her early on, he said, what is it like to know that it's all on you? And this is why I think the interview was so good, because it was a conversation, and a very good conversation, meaning, by which I mean it's a conversation that I would have liked to have had with Kamala Harris, asking the questions that I would have liked to have asked. Like, what is it like to have it be all on you? Because that is a position which I would not wish on anybody, and she said, I literally lose sleep. She said that she gets the end of every day and she sort of stops and asks herself, what can I do more? And that, she understands the stakes, right? This isn't like running for office in the before times, when the truth is, if it's John McCain or Barack Obama who wins, like, it's all going to be fine.
Right.
Right. It's, they have different visions. There are different timelines, but like, it's all going to be fine. That's not the world we live in. Go ahead.
So, you're right. That is a different burden. When you're the only sane candidate, when the only candidate who believes in liberalism and democracy and the Constitution, the burden on you is tremendous. And I think it certainly changes how you run for the office. Maybe it changes how you prepare to administer the office. He asked her about, would you have, you said you'd have a Republican in your cabinet. Would you do Liz Cheney? And she's like, let's not talk about that yet. But she is clearly trying to send signals to former Republicans, to Republicans who voted for Nikki Haley, to people in the middle of the spectrum. I think Kamala is basically a center-left person. I don't think she's a left person. But I think she feels an obligation to represent more of the political spectrum, the center and center-right of the political spectrum, than she might otherwise feel, because Trump is her opponent, because she's going to be, she's got to build this coalition. And you're right, if she doesn't do it, the consequences for the country are absolutely disastrous, in a way that, if you were Obama in 2008, if your alternative is McCain, you run your campaign, you represent more of the Democratic Party, you try to reach across the aisle, but you don't feel this obligation that if you lose, the country, collapses. And I think she feels that in a way that's different from every previous election.
Yeah, my read on her is that she is, I mean this in the best way, is a political opportunist, right? She's been running for stuff for a really long time. And she has tried to position herself in the center of the Democratic Party, whatever that context is. And so she was, when she was running for statewide office in California, she was in the center of the Democratic Party in California. And now she's running in the center of the Democratic Party nationally, which is where Joe Biden lives. And I think that's, again, I don't mean this in a bad way. I think that's actually how a successful Democrat has to, A, campaign, but B, govern right now at the presidential level. Can
I flag a couple of things she ducked that I thought were interesting?
Yeah, please.
So one of them was, he asked her if she had a therapist she can talk to, and she basically talked for a couple of paragraphs, and she said, I got friends I can talk to. Like, she gave the answer you would give if you are in therapy and you don't want to say that in an interview. I think she's just to your point, she's very careful. And she knows that the number one thing she must do here is not screw up in one of these interviews. It's probably why she has delayed doing the interviews. So she sees, okay, that's a landmine. I don't know what opens up if I say I'm going to a therapist. So she ducks it with a non-denial denial. The other one was about race. He said, when you were bused, did you experience hostility? And then she said, that wasn't my experience. And then she quickly segued out of that, because I just think she's been told, don't go for any bait on race. In fact, she used the word distract. He said, what about Trump mispronouncing your name? He said Barack Hussein Obama, Kamala, all that stuff. And she said, same old playbook. It's a distraction. I think she's been told and has figured out that even saying that Trump is a racist just gets people to think of her as the black candidate or the Indian American candidate, the Asian American candidate, and that's a loser for her, and she should stay away from it. She's probably right.
I totally agree. Well, I agree in the second part. Let me do the race first. Yes, I think it's a loser for her because she doesn't need to say it, because her candidacy is so historic. Like, it just talks for itself, right? I mean, this is one of those, Obama didn't talk about race very much, because, like, everybody sort of saw, like, oh, this is like a big historic moment. There are times when you don't have to. On the therapy, I have a very different read on that. My read was that she was trying to not say anything that might sound dismissive of people who are in therapy.
Oh.
And so it was a non-answer. With if she is in therapy, she couldn't say it because that would seem weak, I think, in terms of as an electioning thing. But if not, this is why I'm saying I don't think it was a non-denial denial. I think it was a careful political answer, the way she pivoted from that. In the same way that she pivoted when he asked her about, like, what are you going to do if Trump wins? Like, there's a guy who says he wants to jail his opponents and stuff. And she didn't answer that. She pivoted away to, Howard, we got to work hard. I'm not going anywhere. Two things that she said that were deft and really struck me. He asked her about political violence and death threats. And she said, yeah, there have been death threats, but this isn't the first time in my career. But I don't like to talk about that. And he's like, why don't you talk about that? And she said, because I refuse to live in fear, the bad guys.
Right.
And that was pretty powerful because, you know what? I imagine as somebody who's a prosecutor or prosecuted gangbangers, and then who was first African-American senator from California and first African-American vice president, I imagine she has gotten a whole bunch of death threats over the course of her career. And that, again, it speaks to that sort of quiet strength, which is the real strength, which is just, she's not bragging about it. She's not worried, but just, I'm not going to be in fear of the bad guys. I'm going to live my life.
Can I
and
just...
on the therapy, yeah, please go ahead.
So just on that particular point, it's an interesting contrast between her and Trump, who can't stop talking about getting hit in the ear with a bullet. And look, it was a terrible thing that somebody tried to assassinate the former president, and we should all be very clear about the political violence. But Trump literally did an event this week where a guy who actually earned a Purple Heart, like gave his Purple Heart to Trump, a guy who suffered a wound in war. They're trying to sort of build up Trump as the guy who faced down the bad guys. And she's being relatively quiet about it. She has clearly faced death threats for prosecuting these gangs and whatnot. And she's not pushing it, but I think it's good for people to know that it's true of her, that she has faced that kind of danger. The other thing is, it's not just that she doesn't want to live in fear, which I totally agree with you. It's a good message, especially a good message to send to girls, to women, and to send to men about a strong woman. But the other thing is, she said, I don't want to live in fear of the bad guys. And the belief that there are bad guys, that the criminals are the bad guys, really important, moral truth that resonates with a lot of America that doesn't consider themselves liberals. So I'm glad she said that too. Yeah,
I absolutely agree. And then the two things she said that really sort of hit me in I like that. That's a normal person that I connect to. She talked about being conscious about how you sort of arrange your life, like your personal life. She said you got to choose not to have mean people in your life, which again is just such I don't want to call it a life hack, but is an absolutely true thing that people have to do in terms of self-care. And I thought it was good. But then she talked very briefly because Stern asked her about it. He asked her, what was it like to have Biden call you, in July and say, hey, I'm not going to do it. It's got to be you. And she said, the first thing I said to him was, are you sure? And it's such a small thing, but to me, that really hit me. Like that hit me in the feels, right? I mean, Joe Biden had tapped her, brought him on as a partner. By all accounts, they have a very, very good relationship. She wasn't like on Mars. She saw what was happening in that campaign. She saw the debate, right? And she understood from the minute he got off that debate stage that there was a chance she was going to wind up being forced to carry the sword. And I don't know. The idea of that exchange just really hit me.
Right. right? And it's such a contrast with the opponent, right? I mean, in Donald Trump, we have a guy whose foreign policy literally is, if I had been president, this or that bad thing wouldn't have happened. In other words, he's not really talking about even the world, even, thousands of people dying. It's all,
right.
If it's all about, am I president or not? That's what it boils down to. And here we have the alternative is, first of all, in Joe Biden, a guy who said, I am literally going to sacrifice myself for my country here. I'm going to take myself out of the campaign. I'm the incumbent president. I've won all the votes to do it, but we have to do something more important. And then in turn, Kamala Harris says to him, are you sure? She doesn't say, great, here's my opportunity. I'm sure, to some extent, she's thinking, it's time to step up. But are you sure you want to give this thing up? A question that I can't imagine Donald Trump asking of another person, sacrificing himself or negating himself. And then, and I forgot what the other thing was. Sorry. Let me come back to what you said about mean people. I don't want mean people in my life. My question for you, JVL, is I kind of suspect, I don't know if you think this is true, that much of the gender gap in this election can be accounted for by how important is decency, is basic decency in your vote. And that people who look at the candidate for their character, is this person mean? Is this person cruel? Does this person care about other people? Do they only care about themselves? I kind of think women are just more likely than men to focus on that aspect of the candidate, and therefore more likely to vote for Harris or any non-Trump candidate rather than Trump, and that men just don't care that much about it, and that accounts for some of the gender gap. No?
Well, that's one way of thinking about it. That's a very nice way of thinking about it. The less nice way of thinking about it is that there's a percentage of men who want cruelty and meanness. Your mileage may vary. You guys can figure that out. Last thing, there was another little moment when Stern asked her if she had talked he was asking her about picking Tim Walz as our VP. And he said, did you talk to Obama about the process of picking a vice president or, getting advice, which is a perfectly normal question.
Mm-hmm.
And she was she was like, no, I made the decision. And it wasn't it wasn't an Al Haig, I'm in charge here. It was just a very, very matter of fact, confident, no, this is her call. She made the decision. And I don't know, man. This is not a Yas Queen channel. The Bulwark is not a Yas Queen podcast. I got killed on this YouTube channel a month ago or 2 weeks ago or 3 weeks ago, whatever it was, after she did an interview, because I came out, I was like, yeah, it was fine, but needs to do more of them. It needs to do better. It wasn't great. This was great. This was great.
Yeah. Yeah. And she got in all of the Bulwark messages. She got, I'm a capitalist. She got the words lethal fighting force. Always a good message to the Bulwark audience. And she, and she believes this stuff. Look, she's just being a normal person. She's expressing normal values. Just caring about other people. What she said about Tim Walz, it was my decision, but it was a gut call for her. She likes the guy. A lot of people like him. It's like she made this decision the way she would want a lot of people to make their voting decision. Who is the good person here? Who's somebody who I can count on at a pinch? I trust their guidance, their moral compass. And that's Tim Walz. And she's conveying in this interview that that's Kamala Harris too.
Yeah. Kamala Harris and Howard Stern. It's a great interview. Go listen to it if you haven't. I'm sure it'll be out on YouTube soon. And we're only 1 month. God help us. We are 1 month till the election. The only way we're going to get through this is together. Hit like, hit follow, stay with us here on the channel. We're coming at you every day. We'll get through it somehow. Good luck, America.